Today on Aaron Loves Gear, I'm taking a look at the nPad by dbdrums. The nPad is a sampling pad that's effectively a clone of the Roland SPD-SX, but in this case at a much lower price point at around $250 US. Now, full disclosure, while I did pay full price for the nPad itself along with some accessories, dbdrums was kind enough to provide me with 2 different foot controllers to help me complete this review. More on those later. So some first impressions of the unit. I think this is a very stylish looking device. I really appreciate the orange accents as well as the orange lights that come on whenever you hit the pads. The pads themselves have a really not super firm kind of rubber that has a little bit of a give to it. Unlike something like the Elisa Sample Pad Pro, that's some very stiff, almost metallic feeling rubber you hit. But with this, there's a little bit of give if you were just like press your finger into it, but it still feels solid enough to take a real beating. The unit itself overall feels like it's really well put together. If I dropped the thing, I don't think it would just crack open. Then again, I don't want to find out. The power adapter, however, is quite strange. They shipped it with this AC adapter made for outlets in Argentina, which doesn't help me in North Carolina, by the way. But never fear, they included this travel adapter, so the next time I book a trip to Belarus, I'll be all set. I don't understand why they didn't just ship this with a modular power adapter where you can swap out the different plugs for which region you're in and just throw the rest away. That's what Focusrite does, and I think it worked really well. I have to imagine that it would have been cheaper to ship out 1 power adapter versus 2, but I could be wrong. Here's a quick demo of some of the sounds you can find in this thing. The sounds on board are okay-ish. They're of decent recorded quality, and they can be quite impactful sometimes. I just thought it was weird that not only are they just completely panned mono, despite the fact that the unit supports panning all the samples left and right, but also each preset supports having 2 different sample layers depending on how hard you hit the pads, and they just decided to just not do that for any of the presets. So they're not even really showcasing what the unit can do that well right off the bat. Now, I'm sure a lot of you are just curious to see how this thing performs triggering loops, and since the unit doesn't come with any loops, I got some from the website of the Elisa Sample Pad Pro and put them in here. So it does loops just fine, and I should note that this particular unit from dbdrums, as opposed to the other companies that manufactured the same pad, this one has a full gigabyte of sample storage, if that sort of thing is important to you. I actually only bought this unit to use as a MIDI controller with Superior Drummer, and that functionality is where most of my disappointments are. The MIDI triggering feels pretty sluggish, and that's regardless of if I'm using MIDI over USB or through a 5-pin MIDI cable going to my audio interface. I always feel really disconnected when I'm hitting pads and hearing the samples back. Like, there's not that much latency, it's more of a feel thing, and it just feels kinda awkward. It's not a good experience. So let's talk about some of the accessories that are available for this unit. Again, dbdrums sent over this hi-hat controller, nice and shiny, that I think is really well made and only costs 29 bucks. It's really solid. I feel like you can beat someone to death with this thing. And it's a lot more compact than the similar Alesis controller that I have with the SamplePad Pro, and I just have no complaints out of this thing. I think this branded nylon bag is pretty cool. It's got a little padding on the inside. It was only 20 bucks, and so it just fits in there nice and snugly, and you've got a little bit of room for some other stuff in there as well. I also really like this stand. For 20 bucks. It's not made out of like concrete or anything, but I mean, it wasn't really wobbling or anything while I was smacking the living crap out of the pads, and so I think that's cool. The stand also comes with this mounting bracket. The bracket itself is not standard on the unit, and this little stem only juts out a tiny bit, which is way better than something like this as far as like portability. It's just like it's not gonna just like poke in anything. They also sent over this kick trigger system, which I think works really well for what it is. Not my favorite kind of thing, but you can attach it to any kind of standard kick drum pedal and you're good to go and you get solid response. Speaking of kick triggers, I thought it was really strange that connecting any kick trigger of any kind to the foot switch number 2 jack instead triggers pad number 2. That wouldn't be so weird to me if the manual didn't explicitly state that foot switch 2 was for a kick pedal. However, using a hi-hat pedal triggers it just fine. Go figure. Some other weird things that I found. For some reason, this company has 2 different websites, one in Spanish and one in English that's also mostly in Spanish. There's also different versions of the sample loading software depending on which version of the website that you're on, although honestly they both look like a rush job and are pretty awkward to use. So just wrapping up here, let's talk about who the nPad might be for. If you've had previous experiences with the Alesis SamplePad Pro, which is pretty notorious for its quality control issues and issues with crosstalk as well, maybe something like this might tickle your fancy. At $250 US, I think it's a pretty solid deal if you're going to use it to just trigger some loops and you're going to use it as an auxiliary device. But if you're trying to use this as like a standalone drum pad, you want to mess around with it, use it as a MIDI controller, I do not recommend it for that purpose at all. It doesn't really work well with external kick triggers, and I don't know why they would ship it in this state, honestly. The whole unit kind of feels unfinished, like maybe they were 6 months away from deadline, but this is the unit that we got today, and that's all I can really go on. If you have any questions or comments, I'll be happy to answer them to the best of my ability. And if there's any significant changes to this unit via firmware or what have you, I can make a follow-up video later. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.